Hey everyone, welcome to this week's video. This week I'm going to be talking about how to do career planning and how to get a job in security. Now, you may or may not know that Bug Bounty actually helped me get several of my jobs while I was still a student. So one of the kind of main advantages I think there is to Bug Bounty hunting is the fact that you can use that as like a way to demonstrate your skills to get a good job. So I'm going to be talking about my experience and how I think the best way to kind of leverage Bug Bounty is. But first off, this week's video is sponsored by Detective. With software evolving faster than ever, it's becoming increasingly difficult to keep track of what you're exposing online and where your organization's weaknesses are. Hackers have long been monitoring the web to find vulnerabilities in places where organizations' eyes aren't looking, or they don't even know they exist. They have eyes and ears where companies don't, and that's where Detectify comes in. Powered by a community of leading ethical hackers, Detectify helps security defenders stay on top of web security and thrive in the digital landscape. It captures, scales, and automates testing with the latest active attack vectors from hackers in your daily development processes. Detectify maps out your growing attack surface and conducts vulnerability tests to find exploitable anomalies across your surface. It goes beyond the OWASP top 10 and looks for unknown assets like subdomains and to prevent subdomain takeovers alongside third-party software risks. With your attack surface under control, you'll be able to make more informed security decisions and prioritize your scarce security resources. Hacking yourself is the best way to protect your attack surface, so go hack yourself. Thank you very much to Detectify for sponsoring this video. So, getting a job in security, right? It sounds so easy. And the way people put it, it should be like apply for a job, get a job in security. Excellent. Now you've got your dream job. But actually getting a job in security is actually quite challenging. And it's because security is so big. Like there are so many different roles in any security, like any kind of organization. There's so many different ways that security people support operations. There's a mix of skills there, from like offensive security where you might need more technical skills to things like report writing, to things like communication and working in teams and stuff like that. And with that, a lot of what people want as like a dream job is not an entry-level job, so it can be quite difficult to find a route from entry level to the job you actually would like. And I think this is a really, really good visualization of just how wide security is. Like there are all these different domains. So we have over here security architecture, where we're thinking about, data protection. And that's more kind of ends up being about laws, like what is PII? Over here, we have things like access control, setting up multi-factor authentication, doing kind of identity management. And then over here, we have threat intelligence, which is all about reading research and kind of looking at data. And it's a lot more about kind of like data science skills. We have security operations, threat hunting, incident response, SOC and CM, and really this is like so broad. The skills you need on incident response is things like, take your time, go over the evidence, kind of forensics. But then if you look over here with like application security and API security, that's a lot more technical skills, there's a lot more programming, there's a lot more kind of communicating with developers. We also have things like career development here, what conferences you go to, because that also influences it all. And then we have the entire field of governance over here, right? Which covers things like laws and policy and writing policy. So really, when we say cybersecurity, we're actually talking about a really wide, diverse field of all kind of different jobs. And when I asked because my students asked, what's the best job in security? A lot of people have said, it's what interests you. It's do a job that you really enjoy. Whatever makes you excited. And I think that's really telling that most people realize how large this is and go, well, what interests you? So really that leads us to this point, which is what do you want to do? And people make that sound like a really easy job, easy decision to make. but actually it's probably one of the most difficult questions in security. So my two things I would consider is, first, what do you actually want to do? Like, look at the domain and think, what do you want to do? And then really it's like, what are the entry level jobs into that? And I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. But for example, if you want to do like 0-day vulnerability research, like at Project Zero, that's not going to be your first job. Your first job might be working as a penetration tester, for example, or vulnerability management, or maybe like threat intelligence. But it's not going to be that. But it probably won't even be your second job or your third. You need to find your route to how you're going to do that. So let's have a chat about some jobs in a bit more depth. So the types of job in security. So we have offensive security, penetration testing, whether that's web or network penetration testing. The kind of career routes after offensive security are really in things like the management chain, or becoming really more technical. Governance and policy, very much a kind of offshoot from like security operations, but also with legal requirements as well. So that's coming up with, understanding policy, giving advice to people about policy, whether or not they're being compliant with certain policies, and also kind of enabling that strategic decision making. It's almost like what a CEO would do. Security operations is very much a first job for a lot of people. That's the kind of backbone of any kind of defensive security role. And from there, you've got the kind of management chain, but you also have a lot of like blue team activities. That's really a first job when people think about security jobs. We've got the management chain, there's CISOs, and their job is to kind of look and kind of set strategic policies, to think about decision making, think about compliance. It's very much the more experienced you get and the more you go up the management chain, you kind of have more responsibilities. Yeah, but quite a lot of it is not necessarily technical responsibilities. It's not do a thing. It's about reporting what your findings to things like the board. So it requires a lot of communication skills. You have to take a lot of responsibility and accountability, and that can be quite challenging because it puts a lot of pressure on you. We've got application security. So in certain like security operations, you're supporting things like network security, and maybe window with like where you might have like a Windows setup with Active Directory. In certain like application security, instead you are securing an application a company makes. So like security operations would do the Windows stuff, but application security would do like the product, right? It's like product security. And quite a lot of that is around sometimes doing pen tests, sometimes doing defensive work, running vulnerability scans, but also working with remediation teams. If you are already doing bug bounty hunting, that might be a good job for you to work your way into, because it's one, a good first job, and two, you get to see the triage side of things, but still use your technical skills. So that gives you both the kind of offensive and defensive side. Threat intelligence analysts. So threat intelligence is actually a really interesting field, because it's all about like how you understand threats. And that seems like kind of an easy thing, but actually it's quite difficult to know what threats a company or an organization would actually face. And it's quite difficult to then go, yes, here's what we need to care about. So it's really analytical. It's very much about data. There's security research. So that is like finding new vulnerabilities or contributing to existing tooling, that kind of thing. So there are organizations that will pay for security research, the same way you'd get in something like a university and academia. They basically do it to essentially get the upper hand. Places like Portswigger do that. Now Secure does that. They basically hire people to do research in addition to making their product. We've got incident response. So that is actually responding to an incident responding to an incident actually ends up covering quite a lot of different people's jobs and roles. But actually, incident response as a field is all about kind of respond quickly, but also can be about forensics, trying to understand what has happened, but also things like recovery. So how do you actually, like, if you've been ransomwared, how do you get those files back that aren't paying the ransomware people? Now, these are kind of the jobs people think about when they think about security, but actually there's a bunch of other jobs that are kind of in that are available, right? So we have developer advocates. So a developer advocate is somebody who works for a company that produces a product, and their job is to promote that product to developers. Think like GitHub, right? People will go and say, this is why you should use GitHub over GitLab, and they might be developer advocates. So quite a lot of the time in security, there ends up being things like security advocates. So being a person to talk to. Quite often it's related to things like sales, but not necessarily all the time. So there's content producer / content engineer. People, have to design those CTFs that you use. So places like TryHackMe hire security people to make intentionally vulnerable software. Really common nowadays, especially for things like conferences that will run their own little CTF challenges. Especially this one in particular, which was the DEF CON Safe Mode CTF. Really recommend reading the article on it because it is so interesting about how they actually built this like realistic CTF. There's also advisors to the board, so often security isn't necessarily going to be about kind of being in the trenches. There are people who are advocates for security on a board level who speak up for security matters. They won't necessarily be on the board, but they will be, making their voices heard. There's a teacher or trainer. So, like what I do, I'm a lecturer in cybersecurity. I teach students how to be security people. My job is to sit there and read a lot of books and articles and watch videos and try and condense that into something that different levels of students can understand. So my job is very much to educate people and to do things like talk to different people and figure out, what level they're at in security and actually make something that they can understand and engage with. We've got consultants. So some people, they kind of work for themselves or they do contracts for organizations, and their job is often just to give some limited security advice, like here's how you avoid social engineering attacks. Sometimes you can often be like red team penetration tests as well. So quite often for things like social engineering, or just like having an offensive professional come in and show you what you've got available, can be really useful, and then that can be part of a job as a consultant. But there's loads of different types of security jobs that can be consulting roles. Consulting is a bit weird because you usually get paid a day rate rather than being paid a salary. So you have to ask for more to cover things like sick days and pensions and stuff you would get if you were in a regular job, but you don't if you're a consultant. So the salary tends to be higher on paper, but there are calculators that can tell you it's like equivalent to like a full-time job. An author, a bunch of people write books. I made a joke on Twitter like last week that I end up buying books not because I'm interested in them, but because somebody I follow on Twitter wrote it and I want to support them. But it's true, a lot of people do write books on security, and there's definitely an authorship kind of job out there, which is writing security books and then doing kind of promoting by delivering talks and stuff like that. There's founders, so that's Casey, that's the founder of BugCrowd. There's tons of like different cybersecurity companies though, so if you're interested in kind of entrepreneurship, running your own company, founding a security company is another kind of job. We've got marketing. So all these security companies that you've heard of have marketing teams, and they need technical people on their marketing teams because they don't necessarily understand the technical, but they need to at least appear like they do. I mean, have you ever looked on Twitter and seen a company like BugCrowd or HackerOne or Integrity produce bug bounty tips? That is marketing, but it's in the context of, a technical piece of advice. Somebody has to be on that marketing team that's feeding that technical piece of advice. Often people think that this is just like random technical people within the organization, but marketing teams will often have like those people just on staff. And we've got a sales engineer. So these are technical people who come in as part of the sales process and help give that kind of technical direction. If you think about a bug bounty program, that might be somebody who advises, what kind of results they might expect, what kind of security vulnerabilities, because a salesperson can give the data for that, but they can't necessarily contextualize that in the idea of a particular like company, for example. And of course, these are really not all of the jobs out there. There are so many jobs in security, and when we look back at that domain, like they are huge. But I think it's really important to think about these and look at demand. So this is a graph that shows job search volume by kind of InfoSec jobs. So we have information security analyst and cybersecurity analyst at the top. These are quite broad terms, but will usually mean defensive security. So we have SOC analyst again, and security engineer. When we start to see things like penetration tester, for example, it's all the way down here, right? Penetration tester is here. Application security engineer, which has some offensive security, and then security engineer are all here. Actually, quite a lot of jobs tend to be more on the analyst, so more on the defensive side. So if you want to go into defensive security, there's more jobs out there for you. But certainly when we look at things like malware analyst, we start to look more at research. It's way down there. But that's kind of to be expected, because with things like malware, where you're dealing with like really like technical roles, they're not necessarily jobs that would appear on a job like a job search to begin with. They're more about networking. And it's really hard, it's really easy to look at a graph like this and actually be quite disappointed about it, because it's like, oh, well, the job that I want, I can't have, it's not available. But certainly what's really important is to have what's called a growth mindset. So there's two types of mindsets, and there's like a book on this. And a growth mindset is that challenges help you to grow, and that people being successful isn't like negative towards you. A lot of people will be in the mindset of like, I'm good at it or I'm not good at it. That is it, right? These people have talent. And when we think about a growth mindset, instead we're thinking, yeah, I'm not perfect, but nobody is. These people just have more experience, and I'm getting constructive feedback, and I'm going to grow from this. And I think it's really important in security, and especially in bug bounties, to have a growth mindset rather than a fixed mindset, because it's really easy to stagnate. And stagnation can be kind of the death of a career. It's where you become like happy with where you're at, and you're not trying to figure out what that dream job is, or trying to grow. You're just there being like, I get a paycheck. And there's nothing wrong with saying, oh, I get a paycheck, I'm happy. Certainly not. But it does mean that you're stagnating, and that can lead to you feeling kind of like, okay, I'm done. I'm done now. I've got to the role that I wanted. So how do we turn bug bounties to jobs? So bug bounty hunting is really useful for a career if you use it right. So it's good for proving your technical skills, especially if you're a student like I was, where for me, I couldn't go work at a basic security job because I was doing a degree. Like, I was busy. I couldn't work full time, but it really did help prove my technical abilities and skills to be like, look, I may have been in university, but actually here's a bunch of some bugs I found, right? I'm not just sitting there being like, oh, I went to university, I'll get the experience when I leave. I'm actively pushing myself. It also gives you the opportunity to do offensive security as a job to see if you even like it. Like, not everybody likes offensive security. Not everybody is going to do this. Personally, for me, I find security research really interesting. So I'm really interested in like new vulnerabilities. But for me, getting into bug bounty hunting was a great way for me to do kind of more offensive security and realize, okay, it's really interesting to find these bugs that other people have talked about. What about bugs that people aren't talking about? It allows you to develop skills like report writing. It's actually really hard to write a good bug bounty report. Like, certainly, if you look at my videos and look at some examples, a lot of them are kind of mediocre. If you look at some, like, some stuff that, like, James Kettle from Portswigger have submitted, the amount of technical detail but still readability in there is really, really impressive. So certainly that's a skill that I think we're all still learning. And there's jobs in the bug bounty kind of domain, right? So there's things like triage, program managers, community teams, sales, solutions architects. So if you think about how a bug bounty program actually starts, a company says they're interested to a bug bounty platform. They then have a sales team which will convince them that yes, this is the kind of one to go for. You should go for a vulnerability disclosure or a bug bounty, and here's why. But after that, somebody has to sit and say, okay, here is like what you need to know. Here is the kind of vulnerabilities you expect. Here is, what I think we should put in scope. Here's how I think we should arrange the scope. Here's, you're interested in these kind of vulnerabilities. Okay, let's make a program that kind of focuses more on those. Like, how do you get accounts provisioned? What about if you're on something like Synac where you need like a VPN? How does that work? So there's a lot in there that like is has way more different kind of jobs and stuff like that. And there's also people that, of course, onboard people onto programs. There's people who figure out, which hackers to put on which programs, or what segment of hackers to put on what programs. There's like cybersecurity within the bug bounty sphere, where you have to be like a program manager for a bug bounty team. Like, there's certainly a lot of room there to grow in just the bug bounty space. But I know a lot of you want to work for yourself. I know a lot of you think about bug bounty as a way to kind of do part-time work, but for a full-time pay, and you want to support your families, and traditional employment just isn't necessarily available for you for whatever reason. I know a lot of folks are in India and it's really competitive, and I know a lot of people look at bug bounty as a way to kind of get that like work experience and have a job which is a bit more unusual. I'm gonna be honest with you, working for yourself is hard work. I watched a video where somebody said the problem with working for yourself is that you can often just become completely like engaged with work all the time, that you never don't work when you work for yourself. But it can be really rewarding, like especially in the sense that, for someone like me who makes bug bounty as kind of like a second income for myself, it's nice to have like the stability of work. Like, I get a paycheck every month, but I also like the fact that I get like these little mini bonuses all the time, and it feels good to be able to support my kind of family in that way. But you need a lot of other skills, so things like tax skill, like how does tax law work in your country? How do you register as self-employed? In fact, in the UK, when you register as self-employed, it will ask you about what kind of accounting that you're using. So it does require a bit of knowledge there to kind of do your taxes, pensions, because if you're not working, you're not necessarily contributing to a pension scheme. So how are you going to have a pension? Like self-employment in general, how do you write an invoice? How do you monitor your cash flow? How are you, choosing programs in order to meet your needs? If you think about, rent or a mortgage, how are you going to pay your rent every month? You're going to need networking skills. Like, there's obviously bug bounties, where you kind of just get an invite. But if you're looking at something more local, like becoming a penetration tester freelance, you need to get out there and talking to people. You're going to need marketing to get your company out there. Like, it's not just meeting people, it's also, looking professional in the eyes of clients. Your work is really tied to you. You can feel like you don't really get a break when you work for yourself. You're always working, especially if it's tied up in your own personal brand. That is to say that if you think about, you as an individual representing your self-employment, That is your brand, your personality. So you are essentially providing your personality for money. It can really feel like you don't get a break. But networking is really key. So I think this is a really good way to think about the types of social proof. So certifications are great types of social proof. But if we think about referrals, about experts from customers giving you a kind of a good review and talking through it, that's far more a kind of good social proof out there. Now, I really recommend Twitter. Now, a lot of people do Twitter wrong. Twitter isn't a hellscape like people think it is, but often people don't do Twitter correctly. So how do you do Twitter? Well, first you interact with people, replying, liking. Even someone like me who has like a really large follower count, I notice repeat interactions, especially on comments. So if I see the same people replying, I notice that. I see it on YouTube comments. I see it on Twitter. If you reply to me a lot, I'm going to notice you. And I'm going to think, oh yeah, that person's cool. Share things, but be authentic. Build up that personal brand. Some ideas, comment on recent news, recommend books and podcasts, share some notes or some thoughts on hacking. Pictures really do tell 1,000 words, and on Twitter we're limited to 280 characters, so having really attractive pictures can really help. Now what can make you a bit more toxic on Twitter is leaving your hot take, actually tweeting your hot takes. I think everybody knows at this point who's been on Twitter, Jonathan Scott, not a good example, like needs to just leave some of those comments in your drafts. My suggestion would be to like leave it in your drafts and see if it's something you want to tweet tomorrow. Like give yourself some distance and just see if that's something you'll tweet the next day. And kind of give you some example like of how engagement kind of happens of this one tweet where I was like, should I hire removal people to move? Got 59,000 impressions. Like this isn't a super technical tweet. This isn't promotion for a video. This isn't like super like technical stuff. It's like a silly little authentic moment of like, are removal people worth it? And that's how you should do Twitter, and that's how you can avoid like the trash fire areas of Twitter. Just don't get involved in like drama. Just like leave things in your drafts. So there's loads of different ways to get your name out there. So social media is a great way, writing blog posts, making podcasts and videos, infographics, running webinars, writing guides, making memes, GIFs, having a space where people can submit their own generated content, writing a newsletter. All of these can be really great for getting your name out there and actually get you that first job in security, even if you don't have experience. And another one is volunteering. So I really recommend, if you have maybe a conference locally or you're already part of a community, becoming a volunteer at a conference. It can be really big for helping meet new people and making new friends, especially if you're like me and socially awkward and don't really like people. So getting your name out there with a like just networking with people can be really, really useful, and people love getting help for their events. So how do we get an entry-level job? I really like this video. So this was in 2020. So this was DEF CON Safe Mode. Alyssa Miller's From Barista to Cybersecurity Pro. It is such a good video. And the way it frames how someone can go from a barista, so an unrelated job, to kind of like going into security and how to kind of frame your skills and experience. Really, really useful video. Highly recommend it if you haven't seen it. A lot of people will be like, what if I don't like programming though? And not all security jobs are going to require programming. It's really good to learn. Like, it's useful to create your own tools. It's a fun hobby. Knowing how software is made can help you get into the mind of a developer. If you're doing a degree in cybersecurity, you have to learn it usually. It's good for your CV. It can be a competitive advantage. But there are plenty of jobs that just don't require any kind of programming experience. And here you have Malware Tech, Marcus Hutchkins, talking about how a lot of people don't use programming during their like jobs, and then people have replied being like, hey, I work in instant response. I haven't even attempted forensic in 2 years, let alone written any code. Now, this isn't to say there aren't jobs for about programming, though. So things like reverse engineering requires a lot of programming experience. Things like malware analysis does. Often security research will require a lot of coding, as will like DevSecOps, where you're actively supporting developers. But, these are quite a small proportion of the overall jobs. Quite a lot of them require more about networking knowledge, how the web works, how things like Active Directory work, how you provision accounts, how you work Linux, both as like running it as a server and running it as like something like Kali, for example. So certainly there are like other technical skills you need, but not necessarily programming. And learning. So there's a lot of ways you can learn. So I really recommend taking some time to do like Hack the Box, try Hack Me. There's a lot of really good books. I'm currently reading Practical IoT Hacking again. There's getting a certification like Burp Suite. I'm actually taking that certification very soon. There's videos like my videos, but not just my content. There's a lot of other security people who make really good content. There's doing bug bounties. There's doing like CTF challenges, because there's not just like CTFs for learning, like try Hack Me or Hacker 101, but there's also CTFs for like challenging people. And then there's contributing to open source. There's, writing an issue up and explaining it. And I want to end with this, but what are the fundamental skills in security? I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows what those fundamental skills are. I think that it's really hard to be like, here are the number one things you need to learn to get a job in security. Because I just don't think that really exists. Security is such a new field that I think we're all just trying to figure it out at the moment. And it's not as easy as saying, this is the one thing you need to learn. You've got to learn a lot of different skills. And if we go back to our careers map, now we've had this like whole conversation. Like each of these is a new skill, it's a new tool, it encompasses so much knowledge that there's not just one thing that you need to learn to get into security. And if anyone tells you that, like, they're not telling you the truth. So thank you very much for watching, everyone. And I will look forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye, everyone.